This video is going to show you exactly how the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen breaks bad habits permanently, not through dramatic willpower, not to a complete life overhaul, but to a method so small and so counterintuitive that most people dismiss it before it has the chance to work. And here's what makes this worth your full attention right now. The biggest obstacle to breaking a bad habit is almost never the habit itself. It's the size of the intervention you're attempting. The moment you decide to fix everything at once, you've already lost. I'll explain the specific reason this happens later and why it's the exact trap that Kaizen was designed to neutralize. If that lands, type the word improve in the comments right now and let's begin. Let's be precise about where you actually are, because vague pain doesn't motivate change. Specific, recognized pain does. You wake up and the first thing you reach for is your phone. You told yourself last night that today would be different. You meant it. But the habit runs faster than the intention. And before the intention has had time to activate, the sum is already moving. Or it's the afternoon slump and you reach for the food you said you weren't eating anymore, because the craving arrived before your decision-making system was fully engaged. Or it's the end of the day and you scroll for 90 minutes when you had every intention of reading, and you close the app with a low-grade disgust that you recognize immediately because you felt it before, many times before. The cost here isn't just the bad habit, that's the surface. The real cost is the compound effect on your self-concept, the quiet, accumulating belief that you are someone who cannot keep promises to themselves. Every failed attempt at breaking a pattern doesn't just leave the pattern intact. It adds a layer of evidence that you are the kind of person for whom change is difficult. And that evidence, built up over months and years of ambitious starts and deflated returns to baseline, creates something worse than the original habit. It creates a story about who you are. A story that the next attempt has to fight through before it even gets to the behavior itself. Seneca, writing to a friend about the nature of progress and time, observed that most people waste their lives not in obvious failures, but in the continual postponement of change, always planning to begin, always finding the timing slightly wrong, always imagining that a better version of themselves is waiting just around the next significant moment. He understood that the future self is a fiction used to defer the present obligation. There is no future self who will be more disciplined, more ready, more capable than you are right now in the conditions you actually have. There is only this moment, and what you do in it, and the next moment, and what you do in that. So here is the central insight of this entire video, stated plainly. Breaking a bad habit is not a dramatic event. It is a direction. Kaizen, the Japanese word that translates roughly as change for the better, or more precisely continuous improvement, is not a motivational concept. It is an engineering principle. It says that the path to significant transformation runs through changes so small they seem almost insulting. And it says that this is not a compromise. It is the most efficient possible route. This is not about settling for less. That's the objection people have, and I want to address it directly. Kaizen is not the philosophy of people who can't do more. It was the philosophy used to rebuild an entire industrial nation from ruin after World War II. Applied in manufacturing contexts where precision and reliability were literally life and death matters. It is not small because it lacks ambition. It is small because small changes compound without triggering the resistance that large changes always activate. The modern alternative, the dramatic resolution, the complete reset, the all-or-nothing transformation feels more serious. It is less effective. Not because people lack will, but because the human nervous system responds to large-scale behavioral threats in predictable ways that Kaizen specifically avoids. Let's get into exactly how it works. The first principle is understanding why big changes fail, and it's more specific than most people realize. You've decided to cut out sugar entirely. No exceptions, no transition period, full elimination starting Monday. You make it 3 days. By day 4, the craving is so loud that you're negotiating with it, finding reasons why a small exception doesn't really break the system. And by day 5, you've had the thing you said you wouldn't have, and the rule has collapsed entirely. You don't try again for 2 months. When you do try again, the arc is shorter this time, because part of you already knows how this particular story ends. Epictetus wrote that progress is measured not by the size of the goal, but by the constancy of the direction. He was describing something fundamental about how character is built, not in the dramatic moments of enormous effort, but in the daily unglamorous maintenance of a direction. A person who moves 10 steps in one direction and then retreats 8 has a net gain of 2. A person who moves 1 step per day in the same direction without retreat has a net gain of 30 by the end of the month. The math is obvious. The emotional preference is almost always for the 10 steps, because the 10 steps feel like effort commensurate with the desire for change. 1 step feels inadequate, and that feeling, the feeling of inadequacy, is exactly what Kaizen is designed to bypass. The psychological mechanism here is well established and connected to what researchers describe as the brain's threat detection system. When you attempt to change a behavior dramatically and suddenly, the nervous system reads this as a threat to homeostasis, the body and brain's preference for familiar patterns and states. This triggers a stress response that actively works against the change, producing cravings, rationalizations, and what feels like willpower failure, but is actually a neurological pushback toward the familiar. This is not weakness, it is biology. Kaizen neutralizes this by making the changes so small that they don't register as threats. The system doesn't push back because it doesn't perceive anything large enough to push against. The reframe is this: the reason your big changes keep failing is not a character flaw, it is a calibration error. You are attempting to drive a spike through concrete when you should be drilling a small hole first. The spike takes more force and leaves a messier result. The drill takes less and creates a clean path. Start today with this. Identify the bad habit you most want to break. Then identify the smallest possible reduction, not elimination, reduction. If you're on your phone 3 hours per day, the Kaizen intervention is not 0. It is 2 hours and 50 minutes, 10 fewer minutes. That's it. Do it for a week before you touch anything else. The second principle is making the new behavior easier than the old one, not more virtuous, easier. It's 9 in the evening and you're on the sofa with your phone and you meant to read. The book is in the bedroom, the phone is already in your hand. The friction between you and the phone is approximately 0. The friction between you and the book is a 14-foot walk to another room, and in the economy of evening comfort, 14 feet matters more than you'd like to admit. This is not laziness. This is how all human behavior works. We gravitate toward what is immediately accessible and immediately rewarding, in ways that don't require conscious decision-making. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again in his private writings to the idea of working with the nature of things rather than against it. He didn't mean surrendering to impulse, he meant understanding the conditions under which the right behavior becomes natural and arranging for those conditions. He was a practical philosopher in the deepest sense. He was interested in what actually produces good behavior, not just in what theoretically should. And practically what produces good behavior is an environment that makes good behavior easier than bad behavior. This connects to what behavioral scientists sometimes call friction, the accumulated small obstacles between a person and a behavior. Research on behavior change consistently finds that adding even tiny amounts of friction to a bad habit significantly reduces its frequency, while reducing friction for a desired behavior increases it. This isn't about willpower, it's about architecture. Every time you have to work a little harder to do the bad thing or a little less hard to do the right thing, you've shifted the probability distribution in your favor. The reframe, the question is not, can I resist the bad habit? The question is, can I redesign my environment so that resistance is rarely required? One requires ongoing effort, the other requires one-time design work that pays dividends every day afterward. The practice is to do a friction audit. For the bad habit you want to reduce, add 1 step between you and it. Put the phone in another room before you sit down on the sofa. Put the snack food at the back of a high shelf inside a container that requires some effort to open. Move the alcohol to the car, not the kitchen. None of these make the habit impossible. They all make it slightly less frictionless, and that slight increase in friction, applied consistently over time, has a measurable effect on frequency. Simultaneously, reduce the friction for what you want to do more of. Put the book on the coffee table in front of the sofa, not in the bedroom. Put the running shoes by the door the night before. Make the desired behavior the path of least resistance. Here's a question worth pausing on. How many of your bad habits survive primarily because you made them structurally easier than the alternatives? The third principle is using the Kaizen principle of awareness before action, because most habits run on invisibility, and what you cannot see, you cannot interrupt. You're eating in front of the television and you're not really tasting the food. You're watching the screen with roughly 20% of your attention and consuming with the other 80% of your autopilot. By the time the episode ends, the food is gone. You have no clear memory of eating it, and you feel the vague discomfort of having consumed more than you meant to without the satisfaction of having actually eaten. The habit didn't feel like a choice, it felt like what happened. Seneca observed that most harmful behaviors persist because we perform them in a kind of unconscious haze, not deceiving ourselves deliberately, but simply not paying enough attention to recognize what we're actually doing. He described this as a kind of sleepwalking through life, where the days pass in a blur of unreflected action and a person arrives at old age without ever having examined how they were spending the present. He wasn't being dramatic, he was describing a mechanism. That reflection is the precondition for change, and without it, change is impossible. The psychological concept that applies here is automaticity, the property of well-established habits to run outside of conscious awareness. When a behavior has been repeated enough times in enough similar contexts, it no longer requires deliberate decision-making, it runs as a background process. This is efficient for behaviors you want to keep. You don't have to think about how to type or drive or make coffee. But it means that bad habits, by definition, are the ones you're least conscious of in the moment they're happening. The first step in any behavioral change is not a behavioral change at all. It is awareness. You have to see the habit before you can interrupt it. The reframe. You can't break a habit you're not watching. The habit doesn't feel like a choice because it's running below the level of choice. Bringing it into awareness doesn't require judgment or shame, it requires observation. You are studying a pattern, not condemning a self. The practice is habit tracking in its simplest possible form. For 1 week, do not try to change the bad habit at all. Just record every time it happens. Put a tally mark on a piece of paper or a note in your phone or a simple counter. The act of recording forces consciousness into the moment of the habit, which automatically creates a pause between impulse and action that didn't exist before. And in that pause, choice becomes possible for the first time. You're not fighting the habit yet, you're just making it visible. The fourth principle is replacing the reward, not the behavior, and this is where Kaizen gets significantly more sophisticated than most habit change advice. You've been trying to stop smoking for years. You've tried patches, gum, cold turkey, apps. Each attempt ends the same way. You manage the nicotine craving to some degree, but somewhere around the second or third week, something happens: a stressful phone call, a difficult conversation, an afternoon of boredom, and the cigarette reappears. Not because of the nicotine, because of the pause, the permission to stop for a moment, the excuse to step away from whatever was pressing. The cigarette was never just nicotine, it was a ritual, a boundary, a socially acceptable reason to do nothing for 4 minutes. And no patch in the world replaces that. Epictetus taught that human beings are not driven by their habits, but by the value they attribute to them. Remove the habit without addressing the attributed value, and the value survives and finds another host. The craving for relief, for pause, for permission to stop, these aren't created by the bad habit. They pre-existed. The bad habit just happened to be the delivery mechanism your life provided. And Kaizen, applied here, means finding a smaller, better delivery mechanism for the same legitimate need, rather than trying to eliminate the need itself. This connects to what researchers in behavior change describe as cue routine reward, a model articulated most accessibly by Charles Duhigg in his work on habits. The framework observes that most habits have 3 components: a cue that triggers the behavior, a routine that is the behavior itself, and a reward that reinforces the loop. Most attempts to break habits focus entirely on the routine, the behavior itself, without addressing the cue or the reward. The cue remains, the reward remains desired, and the pressure to find a routine that delivers it remains active. Kaizen, applied to this model, says keep the cue, keep the reward, change only the routine to something smaller, healthier, and functionally equivalent. The reframe: your bad habit is not the problem, it is a a solution to a need that your life is currently not meeting any other way. The Kaizen intervention is not to eliminate the solution, but to upgrade it incrementally until the upgraded version has replaced the original. The practice is to map your bad habit structure. Identify the cue, what triggers it, time of day, emotional state, location, social context. Identify the reward, what does it actually deliver? Stress relief, stimulation, belonging, permission to pause. Then design one small alternative routine that delivers the same reward without the same cost. Not a complete replacement, a partial one. A step in the direction of something better, small enough to be sustainable. If you've stayed with this video to this point, you're already operating differently than most people who encounter this content, because you're not just consuming, you're actually thinking about how these principles map onto your specific patterns. That kind of honest self-examination is genuinely rare, and it's exactly what Kaizen rewards. Hit the like button right now if this is adding real value. It takes 1 second and it helps this reach people who need it. And here's what's coming next. I said at the start of this video that the biggest obstacle to breaking a bad habit is the size of the intervention, not the habit itself. I'm going to show you the paradox inside that claim, why going small is not just easier, but is actually more powerful than going big, in a way that runs completely counter to everything the self-improvement industry tells you. That's next. The fifth principle is the compounding of small wins. And this is the mechanism that transforms Kaizen from a philosophy into a structural advantage. You've been waking up 10 minutes earlier than usual, just 10 minutes. You've been doing it for 3 weeks. It doesn't feel like much, but those 10 minutes have consistently been used for something: a brief walk, some quiet reading, 5 minutes of stillness before the phone. And something has started to shift. Not dramatically, but you notice that the first decision of the day, getting up, is no longer a negotiation, it's just what you do. And that non-negotiation, repeated every morning for 3 weeks, has begun to influence the second decision of the day and the third. Something is building that you didn't plan for. Something structural. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a person who pursues each task with full attention in the right order will find that the accumulation of those moments constitutes a life of actual virtue rather than intended virtue. He wasn't describing ambition. He was describing what happens when small, consistent efforts compound over time into character, not the dramatic transformation event that we culturally tend to celebrate, but the quiet, durable rebuilding of who a person actually is through what they actually do repeatedly. The psychological concept here is what's sometimes described as the self-efficacy loop, a mechanism described extensively by Albert Bandura in his work on social cognitive theory. Self-efficacy is the belief in your own capacity to succeed at a task, and it is one of the most powerful predictors of actual behavior and persistence. Crucially, Bandura's research found that self-efficacy is built primarily by mastery experiences, by actually succeeding at something, even something small, in a domain you care about. Each small win at a difficult habit doesn't just change the behavior, it changes your belief about your capacity to change behavior. And that change in belief makes the next small win more likely, which produces another win, which compounds into a fundamentally different self-concept over time. This is the loop that Kaizen activates deliberately, and that dramatic change attempts accidentally short-circuit, because dramatic change, when it fails, produces the opposite, evidence that change in this domain is beyond you. The reframe. Small wins are not consolation prizes for people who can't manage big ones. They are the primary mechanisms through which self-efficacy builds, and self-efficacy is more predictive of lasting change than any amount of initial motivation. The big dramatic gesture feels serious. The small daily win is serious. The practice is to set yourself up for a guaranteed win every day for the next 30 days. Not a stretch goal, a guaranteed one, something so small and so achievable that missing it would genuinely require effort. 5 minutes of reading, 1 glass of water before coffee, 2 minutes of walking. Whatever it is, make it something you can hit on your worst day. Because on your worst day, hitting it is worth infinitely more than hitting a big goal on your best day. Hit it, note it, build the evidence. The evidence becomes the belief becomes the behavior. Here's the counterintuitive turn, and this is the resolution to the open loop I planned it at the beginning of this video. I said that the biggest obstacle to breaking a bad habit is the size of the intervention, not the habit itself. And I said that going small is not just easier, but is actually more powerful than going big. Here's why that is counterintuitive and why it's true. The self-improvement industry, the books, the courses, the dramatic transformation content is built on a premise that is emotionally satisfying and practically backwards. The premise is that the size of your commitment is evidence of the seriousness of your desire for change, and that dramatic action is how you signal to yourself and others that this time is different. This is seductive because it feels proportionate. The problem is enormous. The solution should be enormous. The emotion is enormous. Therefore, the action should be enormous. But here's what actually happens when you go enormous. The nervous system perceives the enormous change as a threat to its current stable state and mobilizes resistance. The gap between your current behavior and the new behavior is so large that it requires sustained effort of a kind that depletes over time. The first failure, which is nearly inevitable because you've asked for too much too fast, is not experienced as a small setback to learn from. It is experienced as confirmation of the story you were already afraid was true, that you are someone for whom this particular change is not possible. Kaizen produces the opposite experience at every stage. The initial change is so small that no resistance is triggered. The first week of success is guaranteed rather than unlikely. The self-efficacy produced by that guaranteed success is real and compounds. The habit grows slowly, invisibly, underneath the threshold of the self-monitoring that always accompanies dramatic change, the checking, the comparing, the discouraging assessment of how far you are from where you want to be. Because Kaizen doesn't require you to be far from where you want to be. It only requires you to be 1 degree different from yesterday. And this is the paradox. Going small is not the low ambition version of change. It is the high ambition version that is willing to be patient. The dramatic transformation is often the low patience version of change dressed up in high effort clothing. Kaizen says, your goal is real, your desire is real, your frustration is real, but you've been aiming at the final state when you should be aiming at the next degree. And the reason most people resist this is not because they don't understand it. It's because 1 degree of improvement is difficult to feel proud of in a world that rewards dramatic declarations and visible suffering as evidence of seriousness. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we often stop doing good things not because they stop being good, but because we stop being praised for them. The person practicing Kaizen gets no praise. The changes are too small to announce, too gradual to display, too incremental to photograph and post. And that invisibility is part of why it works, because the energy that usually goes into maintaining the performance of change can instead go into the actual change. Now let me show you what your life looks like when Kaizen has been running long enough to show. You wake up and the first move of the morning is not a negotiation. It's not a test of willpower, it's what you do. The alarm goes off and you get up. Not because you are energized or motivated, but because the behavior has been repeated so many times in this exact context that it's no longer a decision. It's a pattern, your pattern. The phone is not the first thing in your hand. Not because you're restraining yourself, because the habit of reaching for it first thing has been replaced through small incremental shifts over many weeks with something that serves you better. The replacement didn't feel dramatic when it was happening. It just quietly became what you do. You reach for the food you used to reach for automatically. And you notice there is a pause, not a dramatic act of resistance, a pause, a moment of genuine conscious choice that didn't used to exist. You've built that pause through weeks of small awareness practice. The habit is not gone, but the automaticity has been interrupted. And interruption is all you needed, because once the choice is conscious, you have the freedom to make it differently. You sit with a craving and you recognize it for what it is, a cue, not a command. You know what the cue is because you tracked it. You know what the reward it's seeking actually is because you mapped it. And you've spent 3 weeks building a smaller, slightly better routine that delivers something close to the same reward, and that routine is now your go-to rather than the old one. Not because you conquered the craving, because you built something more accessible than the old response to it. The bad habit still has a presence, it does not vanish, but its pull is weaker than it was, and its pull is weaker than what you've built in the other direction. The competition between the old pattern and the new one is not dramatic or heroic. It's just physics. One system is more worn than it used to be, and the other is more established than it used to be, and the daily lived experience reflects that shift, quietly, without announcement. The chaos of your life hasn't changed, the stress is still real, the triggers are still present, the difficult relationships, the demanding work, the uncertainty about the future, none of it has resolved. What has changed is that you are no longer at the mercy of the first reaction to all of it. You have a small but real amount of space between stimulus and response, built 1 degree at a time, that gives you the freedom to behave like the person you're actually trying to be instead of the person the unchecked habit was shaping you into. Here is your challenge for the next 30 days. Pick one bad habit, just one. Identify its smallest possible reduction, not elimination, not dramatic replacement, 1 degree of change. Track it every day without judgment. Add 1 unit of friction to it and 1 unit of ease to its desired replacement. Do this for 30 days without changing anything else and without telling anyone you're doing it. The invisibility is part of the practice, because the Kaizen principle is simply this: the smallest consistent change will always outrun the largest inconsistent effort. Comment the phrase 1 degree below it, signals that you're actually applying this, and it helps this video reach people who are ready for it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for all 30 minutes of your attention. Small steps, always forward.